Send an email instead. This is Making Sense with Robbie. Let's get started. So a friend and I were having a conversation. It was part of a group chat, and he kind of got frustrated with something I said. I sent him an email afterwards to try and explain myself. I spent a good, hour coming up with this email. It was probably pretty long, and it kind of was clear about what I was saying. It cleared up all the nuances that were missing in the conversation, because when you're chatting on Messenger or in a group chat, you can't really have a serious conversation. You can't get any of the details. And so I sent him that email, and his reply to me was, I don't want to have an essay off. And so that was kind of discouraging to me. But then later we talked, and he kind of apologized, and he said he was just kind of frustrated and he was stressed or tired that day. And if you sort of step back and you look at history, before we had technologies like we have today, before we had the internet, you would used to have to see them in person or talk on the phone. But the old way before that was sending a letter, because a letter was a great way that you could say all of the things that you needed to say. You could take your time writing it. You didn't have to do it right away. And so you could kind of think about it. You could contemplate it, and then you could even take a picture and include it in your letter. And so there was just this sort of slower process, this different alternative way of sharing, and it used to just be the way. And for longer than there was the internet and there's been telephones, people have been sending letters and communicating via letters. And so to sort of a certain degree, you could say that that's kind of one of the original ways of communicating, because it just allowed people to really think out their thoughts and be really clear about what they meant and what they wanted to convey or what they wanted to communicate. On the other hand, right, on social media, on places where we have to have quick replies or short replies, we often just get a couple of sentences of what's in someone's head, and then we use our bias or our sort of our worldview, our ideology to kind of fill in the rest about who that person is, what the rest of their beliefs are. And so we just get this sort of very small sample of what someone thinks, and then we kind of create this illusion or this idea about them. That's kind of the difficulty of communicating online, or even having a quick conversation with someone, is because if you have a really specific question that you want an answer to, then you can get that. But if you're trying to understand the way they feel about something, it's really hard to communicate that quickly in a short period of time. And it's better to have an in-person conversation. In the absence of having an in-person conversation, then having a sort of a long email conversation, where someone takes the time to be really clear about what they think and what they say and sort of what's on their mind. That's kind of something that we're often lacking these days, and that's really hard to do because most people aren't used to it. We're so used to just our quick conversation. And it gets understandable, because a long read is a difficult thing to do. It's pretty hard to spend 20 minutes reading something online or reading an article or whatever. It's a lot easier to just read a sentence or two and click you like or share and move on. And so that's kind of what we're used to, and that makes it harder and harder to actually communicate with email, because we're so used to communicating in these sort of more modern quick ways that we're kind of losing touch, or we're losing the ability to do the thing that used to be just natural. It used to be the way that we communicated. And I don't really like to participate in group chats, and I am in a group chat with some of my friends, and often they're just talking about baseball and stuff. And so if you're talking about baseball, you're talking about sports, you're talking about really surface things, then a group chat is probably a fine place to do that, because there's not a lot of details, there's not a lot of nuance that's necessary in those conversations, and so it's appropriate, or it at least makes sense. But if you're talking about serious things, then it doesn't really work. It's not really the ideal place to have a conversation, because there's none of that nuance, there's none of that ability to have a precise conversation to actually say what you really mean. You have to come up with something that's short, and most people aren't going to read all of those messages. They'll just read one message or something, and they'll skip over it because they're not interested. The idea though is if you want to have a serious conversation, it needs to go slow. You need to have a medium where you can sort of speak slowly and actually get into the details. And maybe that's part of the reason why we read the news, or we read journalists' articles, or we follow newsletters, because they are giving us that long conversation about what they think. And maybe that's the difference here, is maybe we don't necessarily care so much about the people around us opinions. We want to follow, we want to choose some specific individuals that we respect, or that we want to follow their ideas. Ultimately, what really matters here, or what's most important here, is you want to have a clear, you want a precise conversation. If you want to really express yourself, then long form is the way to go. It's really the best way to communicate. And whether or not someone is willing to sort of respond to that, that's a different thing. But if you want to be clear, or you want someone to be clear in what they believe and what they say, then like you have to go the long form route. While I'm like talking about email, like just think like email was like one of the first communication methods. Like it was one of the first tools that was developed with the internet. Still to this day, right? Like there's so many other alternative tools available, but probably everyone uses email still. This is kind of to say that there's some value in it. There's some regard for its quality. Like, probably sending an email is the best way to communicate because, after so many years, it's still something that we do every day. And who remembers High Five or ICQ or like any of these other technologies that have come along the way? Like they don't exist anymore, right? Like we've kind of moved on from them, but the original is still there. And so there's certainly some value to that. And you can still send a letter to people. Like that's still a thing that you can do. And it's not that common. And it's not really something that people do so much anymore, but there's still value to it. There's still something that's virtuous or righteous about it. And it just seems like we're moving further and further away from slow, contemplative sort of whole thoughts and moving more and more to sort of quick, instant responses, like quick reactions, likes and shares, and opposed to like actually thinking about what's being said and giving a thoughtful reply. And so we're kind of like moving away from this great thing. If you are sort of focused on these other methods of communications, maybe it's more important for you to try and slow down. If you want to take away anything from what I've said today, it's to say what matters, you need to slow down. You need to say it in a more holistic, sort of complete way, and opposed to in a quick, sort of reactionary way. And this is sort of contrary to where technology is headed and where most people's minds are, but I would still say that that's the best way to communicate. And so I encourage you to do that if you can. So let me know what you think about this in the comments below. Do you still send emails? Like, do you still have like, sort of correspondence with people through email? Or are you using social media for everything? If you found this interesting or informative, click that like button. If you are curious about learning how to think, but you don't want to be told what to think, then click that subscribe button because that's what I'm here for. You've been watching Making Sense with Robbie, and we'll talk next time. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.